Hi, ladies and gentlemen. So last week we read an Edgar Allan Poe short story called The Pit and the Pendulum. It's in our textbook. We read it. We actually listened to it. And then we did a couple of assignments on that text. And I told you last week that we're going to read another Edgar Allan Poe short story this week, and that is what your semester exam is going to be over. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to read The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, and we're going to read it together and we're going to discuss it. And then starting tomorrow, you'll be taking your semester exams. You can use your text that's going to have your notes on it on the test, and you can also use the review that you're going to get after we're done with this video. So make sure that you get that review done. So this is called The Black Cat. It is difficult to read in that some of Edgar Allan Poe's vocabulary is very advanced. He uses a lot of words to say very simplistic things. And so when you're just reading it, it sounds like it's challenging. But if you just break it down and ask yourself, what is this text really saying? It's not as difficult as it seems, I should say. So first, I want to review Edgar Allan Poe. If you remember from our background information last week, he did have a lot of mental health issues. He suffered from alcoholism. He suffered from gambling. He had quite a bit of misfortune when he was younger. He did lose his young wife at a fairly young age, and when they hadn't been married for too long, and he never really seemed to kind of get over that. So it kind of haunted him and made him extremely upset. So we can see all that in his writings too. So this is The Black Cat. It is, as you can see, you can already kind of look at it and see a bunch of eyes. It's written in first person. It is going to be kind of like a journal entry. We don't ever learn the narrator's name. We just know that something happened to him, and we kind of learn about his story as we read. So it has been a while since I've done this online, so I'm going to try and get this done as quickly as possible as we go through it. But kind of keep in mind, this is going to be a lengthy video. But that's okay. It's a lengthy video because this is exactly what we would be doing together in class. And if you think about how long a class period is, that's going to be about how long I expect this video to be as well. So I know it's long and I know it's not entirely exciting, but rest assured you would be going through this in class with me. And rest assured that it would take the whole class period. So it's going to be okay. All right. So without further ado, here we go. The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburthen my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, secondly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me, yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me they presented little horror, to many they will seem less terrible than a barricade. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my fantasism to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. So that's the first paragraph, and we can see this is him introducing the narrative. This is him telling us what he's writing about. Okay, and you can already see some of this vocabulary and the way that he phrases things. It's confusing, okay, but we're going to break it down. So the first thing I want to say, for the most wild yet most homely narrative for which I'm about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. He's saying, I'm about to pen this story to you. I'm about to write this story to you, and I don't really expect you to believe me. Okay? In fact, I expect a lot of people are going to reject this story. It's not true. Yet it is true. And tomorrow I'm going to die, and before I die, I want to unburden my soul. So the first thing I want to do is I want to highlight, and I'm going to highlight in yellow, unburden. Okay? And unburden means, I'm going to put it above, unburden means to unburden, to unload. You really probably need to do this, probably in like Velka or Warrior New, just because it's going to look really different. I'm going to put it at 10, and then I'm going to move it down because it's going to be hard to see. It would be harder if it was on the original papers. Okay, so to unburden, to unload, he's going to tell us what happened, to get it off of his chest, to make himself feel better. They're just mere household events, just normal, common things that happened in our house. And it says, yet I will not attempt to expound them. Will not attempt to expound them. And them is the events that he's talking about. What happened in his home. And so we're going to tell you what expound means. Expound means to make a detailed statement, to explain. I do think it's important that we note, I'm going to go back real quick, that tomorrow I die. I have to change my line to that. Let's see. Okay. Because this is going to be important. This is the reason this is the purpose for the story and what he's doing. So we need to make sure that we understand that. Okay, so I will not attempt to expound them. I will not explain what happened. I'm not going to give any kind of actual justification for what occurred. This Baroque or Baroque, it's a time period, and it's talking about a specific type of art. I would recommend. It means it's a type of art, and that's really what he's talking about. But it's like a grotesque. Oh no. Grotesque, brutal, dramatic piece of art. Okay. All right. So, and then he says maybe one day somebody can find something knowledgeable about what occurred. But that's not really the purpose. The purpose is he's trying to unburden his soul. Okay, so that's what that was his introduction. He's telling you why he's writing, what he is. Okay, and he's telling you it's a true story. He's in jail, and he knows that he's going to be executed tomorrow. So that means we already know that he was arrested. He was tried for a crime. We don't know what crime yet, but he was tried for a crime, and he was sentenced to death. And tomorrow is his execution day. And before he's executed, he wants to unburden his soul. And maybe find peace, right? Okay. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. Peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. So here we're learning a little bit about what he was like as a child. Okay, what do we know about him based on this? So he says, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. Well, first of all, docility is an unfamiliar word for a lot of you, or a lot of us, right? So we have to see what that means. And docility is easily managed or handled. Let me go back and fix eyes there. And so when you think of kind of like animals and the really friendly animals that are easy to handle and easy to take care of, we call them docile, right? Like your pets, like your pet dog and stuff. And so we know that when he was little, he was docile too. He was very even tempered. He was kind. He was caring. He didn't argue. He wasn't a bad kid. He wasn't rambunctious. Nothing like that. And my tenderness of heart um, was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. So we can see that he was made fun of because of his we'll call it sensitivity. And he said he spent most of his time with animals. And so we know that as a young child he already had developed the love of animals, and he enjoyed their companionship. So I'm going to tell you that this is going to be important. Why does he tell us this? So um, I'm going to put a question mark, but while I put a question mark here, I want you to write down on the side here, why is it important that we know he liked animals as a child? What does that tell us about him? I'm going to give you a minute to write that down. Okay, so let's continue on. I married early and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. So we know that they had lots and lots of animals, and you can see, and I'm going to highlight this one in a different color. A cat is in italics, and so we know that he's probably doing that for emphasis. Okay, and so that's going to be important that one of their animals was a cat. So when he was young, he got married, and his wife was not uncongenial with him. And so the word uncongenial means indifferent, unlike, unsuitable. And this is not unlike his own disposition. So she was quiet, she was calm, and she loved animals too, just like he did. And so it's important to note that both were really big animal lovers. This latter was a remarkably, and the latter would be the cat, the last one in the list. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. And speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Okay, so first, we have a couple of words here, like sagacious, and we saw that earlier too, but I think it's easier to understand what it means here, and also more important here. Um, Sagacious to an astonishing degree. Speaking of the cat's intelligence, his wife would say that the ancient superstition said black cats are witches in disguise. So we know that sagacious is talking about how intelligent the cat is, and if it's a witch in disguise, obviously the cat is going to be pretty smart. So sagacious means smart, shrewd, good judgment. And I'm going to scoot that over just a little so it fits all the way on the page. But it was a very smart cat. And the next word that is kind of an odd word here is the word tinctured. Not a little tinctured with superstition. And so my question is she superstitious or not? Does she actually believe in the superstition? Does she actually believe that the cat is actually a witch? And if you look here, it says not. And so, of course, the answer is no. So tinctured means infused, or a trace, right? A trace of it exists in her. And the answer is no. He does not think she is superstitious or was superstitious in the least bit. So we have two characters so far. We have the narrator and we have the wife. Okay. A couple things I want you to keep in mind, and we can put those up here. I want you to think of these couple things. One, reliability of the narrator. How reliable do we think the narrator is? Do we believe he's telling the whole truth? And I also want you to think about, was the narrator superstitious? Those two things I want you to pay attention to as we read. Okay, Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Okay, so now we have a third character. We have the narrator, we have the wife, and we have the cat, whose name is Pluto. And so I want to talk about his name real quick. We know that Pluto is it's a planet, but where did the planets get their names from? And not everybody knows this, but Pluto is some of you are going to know, I know you are, and you're probably already saying it, but Pluto is actually Roman god of the underworld. Okay, so Pluto is Hades, right? Okay, one stay down. Pluto is Hades. He's the god of the underworld. Okay, and that's going to be important. Okay, so Pluto was the narrator's cat. He was his specific cat. It was his favorite animal of all the animals that they had, and the cat went everywhere with him, and even tried to follow him out of the house and into the streets. But of course, the narrator wouldn't let him. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me. For what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. So this is a very, very key paragraph because before he was happy, he was having fun, he loved his pets, he loved his wife, everything. And now something is changing inside of him. And so if we look here, it says, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance. And so we have to understand what the fiend intemperance is talking about. And this is an old school term that we don't really use it anymore, but self-control. And it is only talking about, and literally only talking about drinking. Okay, and so when you have an intemperance, you have a lack of self-control. Drinking, you are abusing alcohol. You're becoming a drunk. Okay, I radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. So we're seeing a change in him. And I'm going to underline that because it's pretty important, this change. It says, I used intemperate language to my wife. Again, the lack of self-control. He was very mean to her. He said rude things. He yelled at her, and he was, I'm going to say, emotionally abusive. And then it says, at length, I even offered her personal violence. And this, in these fancy words, it's meaning he abused her. He physically abused his wife. And then he did the same with his pets. And the only pet that was safe was Pluto. He's the only animal that wasn't treated badly. And we know, because he tells us here specifically, what he blames all this on. And if you'll remember, Edgar Allan Poe himself had an alcohol problem, right? And so and we can see that this character has the same problem. We also see this word here, and you may have used, kind of context clues to figure out what it means, but maltreating means treat cruelly or with violence. He didn't treat him right. He abused the cats, the animals, and he abused his wife. One night, returning home, much intoxicated, which of course means drunk, from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fibre of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. So, before this paragraph, the cat has been safe. The cat is the one being in his home that has not been treated badly. We know he came home and he was drunk. And he thought, the cat is avoiding me. Why is the cat avoiding me? I'm not mean to the cat. And so he grabbed the cat, and he's drunk. So did he grab the cat gently? No. And the cat, and this is important, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth, which means the cat bit him on the hand, right? This is what I'm talking about. He uses big words and big vocabulary to say simple things. So he grabbed the cat bit him on the hand. Okay? And then he got mad. He said, "The fury of a demon possessed me. I knew myself no longer." Have you ever gotten so mad that the anger just kind of took over you and you said things and did things that you wouldn't ordinarily do? That's what this guy did. And so he said, uh, "I took from my waistcoat pocket, a penknife, opened it, grasped the beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket." So he took out his knife and he literally cut the cat's eyeball out. Okay. There's a couple words in here that we can go ahead and define. Malevolence. That means having or showing a wish to do evil. Scoot that over just a little bit. We also see the word atrocity, and that just means while he penned the damnable atrocity, and he's talking about while he's writing this story down. And so extremely wicked or cruel act. I'm just gonna put cruel act because I don't have room to read all that. But while he writes about his terrible deed. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. So it says, when he had slept off his drunkenness, he felt terrible about what he had done. But his soul remained untouched. While he felt terrible about it, he knew that he was not beyond saving, right? Because it wasn't so great of a crime that he would go to hell. And so then it says he again plunged into excess. He again began drinking heavily to erase the memory of what he had done. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer suffered any pain. He went about the house as usual, but as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow the spirit of perverseness. Of the spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is that one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not, 100 times, found himself committing a vile or silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? The spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of my soul to vex itself, to offer violence of its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue, and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the offending brute. And I'm going to stop right there and explain what this is talking about before we go into the next part. He's saying the cat recovered, right? But now the cat flees at his approach because the cat's terrified, right? I mean, he carved out his eyeball. Okay, the cat doesn't like him. And at first, he was very upset about all this. He was pretty upset that the cat, and we're going to kind of underline some of these. He was very upset that the cat avoided him, kind of hurt his feelings, etc. And then, instead of being sad about it, he got mad. He was irritated. How dare that cat forget that cat trying to run away from him? How dare that cat not love him anymore? And so then he says, came the spirit of perverseness. Okay, and we don't know what that means yet, but when we continue to read, he asks us a set of questions. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? And I'm going to put a question mark right here by this, because I want you, once we're done talking about it, to write down over here on the side what your opinion is of this. Do you agree? Do you remember ever doing something because somebody told you not to? Right? So when you were little and you were in the car and you were going on a road trip and your mom said, don't touch your brother. What did you do? You touched your brother, right? When you were younger and your mom said, stop touching stuff when you were walking through the store, did you stop? No, you kept touching stuff because you were told not to. And so when you were younger, is this true? Do you really find yourself doing silly stuff that you're told explicitly not to do just because you can, right? And so my question is that true? First of all, do people do that? Do people do things that they're told not to do just because they're told not to do it? Okay. Or is this not true? If you're told not to do something, you don't do it. And my question is, does this change with age? And does this make what he did right? The spirit of perverseness is what he's talking about. It is you choosing to do the wrong thing because it's wrong. So what is your opinion about this? I'm going to give you a minute to kind of write that down. Okay, and so now we're at the next kind of big event that really happens in this story. I'm not going to highlight it yet. We'll read it first. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. And so he said earlier, he said, I had committed a crime, I did something wrong, I had carved this eye out of the cat, but my soul was still in place. He still could go to heaven, right? But now he's saying, one morning in cold blood, and this is pretty important because it's a big event that happens. It's kind of the next big thing. With tears in his eyes, he put a noose around the cat's neck and hung it from a limb in the tree in his garden at his home. And then he tells you why he did it. He did it because he knew the cat had loved him, and he did something terrible to the cat, even though he knew it loved him. He did it because he did it to a cat that was innocent. Right? He had harmed this innocent being. He did it because he knew that he was now committing a sin, and he was now going to burn in hell where he deserved to be, right? Because he deserved to go to hell after what he had done to the cat. And so he wanted to make sure that he went there. And so that's why he hung this cat on the tree. This is all the stuff going through the guy's mind. Okay, so you can see that the guy's a little bit unhinged, probably. And he also has, kind of some mental health issues. I told you guys, this is a pretty morbid story. Okay, so excuse me, on the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. So on the same night that he had killed this cat by hanging it from a tree, he was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. So this is the next event that we had. His house burns down. Everything that he owned, all his worldly possessions, were burned. So now he has absolutely nothing. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts in which not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The word strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if given in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. And so he's telling you that the day after the fire, he went to his house that had burned, right? And all the walls had fallen in, except one wall in the middle of the house, and it was the wall of which his bed was against, right? So his head rested against that wall. And here, the wall and the plaster and everything resisted the fire, and it remained in place. And so then all these people were standing there, saying stuff, and it says, I approached and saw as if graven, and that means, or let's highlight it. Graven means, graven means engraved. In bas relief, and bas relief is an artistic form, and you would really have to kind of look that up on your phone to really see what it means. But it means it's a type of sculpture. It's a type of sculpture art. And you can see it was a figure of a gigantic cat, and cat is italicized again for emphasis, and the cat had a rope around its neck. And so, of course, this figure on the wall after the fire looks like the crime that the narrator had committed the night before. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. And so we have here, he's giving the rationale, the reason that this occurred. Okay, so this is important. Okay, so upon the alarm of the fire, people started filling in because they wanted to help them, right? Because that's what people do. They generally want to help each other, right? So if if you saw that there was a fire at your neighbor's house, you would go and try and help. So when somebody said fire, fire, a crowd of people went into the garden and um, tried to find a way to wake up the people who lived there. And so he's saying somebody must have cut the cat from the tree and then thrown it in the window trying to wake him up. And whenever they threw the cat in the window, it kind of exploded. And so when it kind of exploded, the remnants of it engraved itself into the wall, and that's how this figure was created. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. And so he's saying, he kept seeing that picture, that image in his mind of the cat post fire, and he began to feel regret about the animal being gone, and he says that seemed to be remorse. He seemed to feel guilty and to feel bad about what he had done, but he says in there, but was not remorse. So we know that he's going to find out eventually that he actually wasn't sad that the animal was gone, and he didn't really feel bad about what he had done. So now he's kind of looking around, and it says the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented. He's talking about bars, right? He's going around and getting drunk again. And so he's looking for another pet of the same species, that being, of course, a cat, to take Pluto's place. One night as I sat, I don't know why this won't go away, but one night as I sat, half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object, reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin, or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I had once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. And so he says he was in a bar one day or one night, and he was just sitting there looking at the containers of alcohol, and he suddenly noticed that there was actually a large black cat sitting upon uh, the containers. And so he walked to it and he touched it. It was a large black cat, just as big as Pluto was. But the only difference between Pluto and this cat was this cat had a large portion of white fur covering its chest, whereas Pluto had been completely 100% black. And once he was touching the cat apparently, liked him a lot, and he asked the landlord or the owner of the establishment if he could buy the cat, but the man had no idea where the cat came from. It wasn't his. So I do want to point out that it says, I sat half stupefied. If you watched or read Harry Potter, you probably know what stupefied means. But basically, it means frozen in place. So he was just sitting there in this establishment, um, not moving, just sitting there, probably because he was intoxicated. Um, so this black cat here is our next character. So we have 4 characters or main characters. We have the narrator, we have the wife, we have Pluto, who is now dead, and then we have the second black cat. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. So he continued petting it and loving on it, and then when he left, the cat followed him, and he allowed it to follow him. And as they were walking back home, he kept stopping to pet the cat and kind of encouraged the cat to follow him. And when he got home, he domesticated himself. He made himself comfortable at home, and immediately his wife kind of took to him. So we're gonna kind of underline this because it's another pretty big, important event. So now the cat is at his home, and he feels comfortable being there. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame in the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty, preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as from the breath of a pestilence. And so he's saying, while his wife, kind of became friends with the cat. They kind of took to each other. He did not. He didn't like the cat. He didn't like the cat at all. He thought he would like the cat, and he thought he wanted the cat. But in reality, he was disgusted and annoyed by this cat that liked him so much, and so he just started to hate the cat, and he avoided the cat. When the cat would come around, he would flee. He would go the other way. When he would go into a room and the cat would be there, he'd kind of leave the room. He avoided the cat. What he thought maybe it was shame for what he had done to Pluto. Maybe he doesn't know, but he didn't like this new cat, and he said he didn't physically abuse this cat for some weeks. He didn't do anything. He didn't touch the cat. He didn't touch the cat. Nothing. But eventually, he just loathed the cat so much he absolutely 100% hated the cat. He couldn't stand looking at the cat. He couldn't stand being in the same room as the cat. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I've already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. So what did he discover? I'm going to highlight it, because it is really important. I'm going to highlight it in the blue that I highlighted earlier. It had also been deprived of one of its eyes. So the narrator carved out Pluto's eyeball, right? Well, this cat was also missing an eye, just like Pluto was. And so he thinks that is a huge part of why he hated this cat. Now, the wife, she was just like, oh, what a sweet kitty. Oh, the poor kitty lost its eye. It's so sad. And she loved the cat even more for it. But he was disgusted. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with the pertinacity which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair, or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long, sharp claws in my dress clamber, in this manner, to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. And so we see, while he disliked the cat more and more each day, the cat seemed to like him more, and the cat tried to be wherever the narrator was. He tried to get on him whenever he could. He wanted to be with the narrator, and so while he longed to destroy with a blow, he wanted to kill the cat. He didn't allow himself to do that, partly because he remembered what he did to Pluto and he felt bad about it, but also because he was scared of the cat. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair, of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and for which a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shuddered to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and of death. And so now we learn why he was scared of the cat. He was scared of the cat because this white mark that at first he couldn't tell anything different, it was just a white mark on his chest. Suddenly, it was kind of a pattern. Like when you look at the clouds and you say, oh, look, there's a cow, right? This white mark on the cat formed into a pattern, and that pattern was the gallows. What are the gallows? Remember, the gallows are the things that you stand on when you're getting hung, right? So you stand, it's where hanging occurs, okay? And so it scared him. It scared him to death. There is a word here. We'll cover it when it says it again because it'll be more poignant there. Yes. Okay. So he's terrified because it took the shape of the gallows, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of underline that. This is a terrible outline. So it formed the image of the gallows, which terrified him to his very core. And now he was indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man, fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent entirely upon my heart. And so here we see that he's beginning to really kind of have a mental breakdown. He says, I got no rest because of this cat, this beast. He says, at night, at the daytime, I had no break because the cat wouldn't leave me alone. And at night, I couldn't sleep because the cat was on me. It was sleeping on him. Plus, he had nightmares and stuff of what was going to happen to him because of this crime that he had committed, and the guilt that kind of stayed on his soul for what he had done to Pluto. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased the hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outburst of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. So he didn't have any sleep, and he got madder and madder and madder. And he says, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. He became 100% evil. He didn't have any good left in him whatsoever, and he hated everything and everyone. And he says that his wife, who never complained and was patient and she was kind, she got the brunt of his abuse, both emotional and physical. One day, she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly drowning me, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife, goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal. I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This whole paragraph needs to kind of be outlined because this is like your climax of the whole entire story. This is the turning point. So he and his wife were going down the stairs into the cellar of this horrible home that they lived in because they couldn't afford anything nice anymore because everything had burned up. So they go down the cellar, and as they're going down the stairs, the cat followed them. And the cat kind of darted in between his legs, and he almost fell. And he was so mad that the axe that he had in his hand, he raised up to kill the cat with. And he would have succeeded, but his wife grabbed his arm to keep him from killing the cat. And he got mad. Rage flowed through his veins. And instead of killing the cat with the axe, he took the axe and he brought it down into his wife's head, killing her on the spot. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. So, he kills his wife. And now he's like, well, oh no, what do I do with the body? How can I get rid of the body without getting caught and sent to jail? And so he's like, what can I do? What can I do? And so he comes up with all these ideas on what he can do with her body, right? Each one more grotesque than the next. It's terrible. And finally, he decided upon one. He said, I determined to wall it up in the cellar. Edgar Allan Poe has written other short stories where this exact same thing happens. It's something that you'll see a few times in his works, but he determined to wall up his wife's body in the cellar. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection caused by a spit chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the red of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the whole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully I apologize. And having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while with little trouble I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain. And so here we see he gives us the process that he used to put his wife's body in the walls. Okay, and he tells you exactly what he did. So he dislodged the bricks, he put the body in, he put the bricks back up, and then he was very careful when he picked up the trash and stuff that was on the floor, so as not to cause alarm or make people think, hey, there's a body in the wall. My next step was to look for the beast, which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been, I apologize, no doubt of its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. And so here, he says, you know what? Once I was done doing that, I looked for that cat, because I was going to kill the cat. I had already decided that cat was as good as dead. And he says, if I had met the cat, found the cat, it would have died. But the cat appeared to have taken off, right? He knew that the guy was crazy, and it fled. So then he went to sleep that night, and he hasn't been able to sleep, right? Sleep came to him, and he slept so peacefully and so good that night. Even though he had murdered his wife, He still slept so soundly, knowing that that cat was no longer in his home. So this is important. My next step was to look for the beast, because he was going to put it to death. And then it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed by his anger and deserted him, which made him so happy. The second and the third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. So he's saying the second, third day came, and the cat was gone. And he was so happy that the cat had left him forever and ever and ever, and he was so happy. Um, uh, he said, the guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. He isn't really too concerned that he killed his wife. He said a few inquiries have been made, but he answered them easily. Nothing was going to be discovered. He knew that he was safe. And it says, upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say if but one word by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. Okay, so here, on the fourth day, the 4 days after he had killed his wife, the police came into his house, and he hadn't been expecting them, but he wasn't really that worried about it, to make rigorous investigation of the premises. And so the word rigorous means, oh no, I gotta fix that. It means extremely thorough. Precise. Extremely thorough, severely exact or accurate, precise. Let me see. Okay, sorry. Okay, they wanted to make a very exact, precise examination of the home, to make sure that nothing bad had happened. In the inscrutability of my place of concealment, inscrutability means impossible to navigate. And so he knew that he had hid his wife's body very well, and he wasn't worried about it being discovered. And so they go into the cellar, and he walks in there, and he's not worried because he knew that they were not going to find her. There was no way. Everything was done perfectly, sealed perfectly. Everything looked good. And so he says, gentlemen, I said at last, as the party ascended the steps. They were going back into the home from the cellar. I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By gentlemen, this is a very well constructed house. In the rapid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane which I held in my hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. So he's saying, he's bragged as the policemen are leaving and they're going up the stairs into the main part of the house. He's like, guys, this house is so good constructed, well constructed. It's amazing. This house is just like so good, so well put together. And he takes his cane and he bangs it on the exact portion of the wall that his wife is behind. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wail, shriek, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in the damnation. So what has happened here? So he banged on the wall where his wife was, and as soon as he banged on the wall, a noise came from inside the wall. A howl, they said. A howl. This is important. I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. A howl. Okay? And so he says, from the throats of the damned in their agony and the demons that exult in the damnation. And so he's kind of saying, um, the people in the demons in hell, they are, or Satan himself, right, is shrieking out from the wall, telling the police what the narrator has done, right? Of my own thoughts, okay. Of my own thoughts, it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. And so, what did the howl come from? Who was making that sound, right? So, he's like shocked, right? He says, swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. And swooning means to faint, to lose. I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong. I so did. I still spelled that wrong. I'm pretty sure that's still spelled wrong. There we go. Okay. So he's like almost fainting, right? He's kind of like just shocked beyond belief that something is going on. And so the police are like digging into the wall because what is in there? And they see his wife's body already kind of decaying and rotting. And on top of the head of his dead wife sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. It was the cat. The cat had gone into the wall as he was closing up the woman and his wife's body, and climbed onto her. Well, he didn't necessarily climb onto her head, but he gotten into the wall with her, and unknowingly, the narrator closed him up in there too. And so when he rapped on the wall, the cat kind of came to life and was like, get me out." And because he had walled up the cat, the narrator was found out and um, sentenced to the gallows eventually, right? Okay, so a couple things you need to make sure that you note at the bottom of your paper is how reliable do you find this narrator? Do you really believe everything that he says? Why or why not? You're going to need to know that. You're also going to need to think about how superstitious you think this narrator is. Um, so this was a pretty morbid, pretty dark story about a guy who had some mental issues, and he was definitely suffering from kind of an alcohol abusive relationship. Um, you need to go and get the exam review, and you need to complete it whether or not you're taking the semester exam. Even if you're exempted it, you need to do it. Um, it's a PDF. You'll open it up either using DocHub, or you'll use Cami, or if you're doing it on your phone, you can just edit it right on there on your phone or an iPad. If you have any questions, let me know. This is the story that your semester exam is going to be over, so make sure you do that review because it's going to help you a lot. And you can use your text and the review on your semester exam. Those are the only two things that you can use on that exam. So make sure that you do your review. You'll have a great day.